We're going to jump right into this topic, but first I want to thank the CrowdStrike team and the Spy Museum. I'm on the board of directors of this fantastic organization, and I hope you're enjoying a little bit of your glimpse of this institution. We're going to be talking about threat intelligence with this distinguished panel, and you can see what they're currently doing. But I want to actually ask each of them to start with a very brief overview. How is each of your organizations postured and organized to take on your mission? And generally speaking, what is the role of threat intel in your arsenal? And why don't we just go right down the line? Chuck, we'll start with you from the perspective of the State Department.
Sure. So essentially, I mean, threat intelligence is the core of what we do. That is my job, and we are consuming that from a variety of sources and producing it ourselves. And we've divided ourselves into a couple of groups. There's essentially a research intelligence group who's writing white papers to better understand actors, techniques, et cetera, things that we need to be prepared for. We have a group that performs technical research. So they're trying to better understand malware, how it's operating, the things that may mean are coming next, and how we can go about protecting ourselves based on that. And then we have a group that's doing analysis of all activity impacting the department so that we can develop a better understanding of what we have been seeing and use that to predict what we are likely to see next. And then all that stuff is underpinned by a group that performs data analytics to enable the functions of each of the other groups.
And who is your main customer for all of this analytic activity and this threat intel that you amalgamate and develop?
So I sit in the network defense organization, and so the primary role that we have is to inform our network defense posture so that we're able to consistently improve our capability to defend the network.
Great, thanks. Quiessence Phillips, who also goes by Q, brings a perspective from New York City Cyber Command. I know we've heard some about Cyber Command from the New York City already during this gathering. But Q, how is your team organized, and how do you integrate threat intel in your operational posture?
Sure, thanks. I'll spare you all the details as Jeff had a lovely talk earlier today. But my function is threat management, and we specifically are broken out into 4 teams. So that encompasses our Security Operations Center, our 24/7 eyes on glass monitoring detection, our incident response team, who is your Tier 3 special projects, also advanced incident response. And then lastly is our CTI, or cyber threat intelligence function, and our counter threat automation, who focuses on automation orchestration efforts for everything threat management related.
And again, let me ask you the same question, which is, what do you do with it all? Who's the customer? How are you kind of servicing the broader Cyber Command mission and ultimately for the city's well-being?
Yeah, so a lot of us, as Jeff mentioned earlier, we're coming up on 2 years old. So a lot of the teams that we're building are fairly new. However, many of the individuals working within Cyber Command come from an incident response background. So we're heavy believers of intelligence-driven response. So intel is baked into all of our response activities. Who are our customers, as you asked, that's everyone in New York City. So one, we think about residents first, even though all of the services that we deliver are for the residents. So every agency, entity, office within New York City is our customer.
Terrific. Erin Joe, who brings a perspective as director of CTIC at ODNI, and we are eager to hear how that organization is operating. Erin?
Sure. The ODNI was established as a result of the Patriot Act, so it's still a fairly new organization from a broad perspective. It sits across the intelligence community, has several functions, and one of those is to be the primary intelligence advisor to the president. Another is to manage the national intelligence budget of over $50 billion to make sure that the intelligence community can operate most effectively against all threats, including the national security cyber threats. CTIC, my center, is just one of several centers that sits under the ODNI. We are a fairly new organization as well. We were only established in the last 3 years. I'm only the second director to sit in CTIC, so we have a number of things that we've had to do in a very short period of time to get up to speed and look across the intelligence community and find ways to be as effective as we can be. I also want to mention another center under the ODNI, which is the Intelligence Community Security Coordination Center, the ICSCC. Their responsibility is to look at network defense capabilities across the community and keep the networks and information structures as safe as they can possibly be across the intelligence community. So they are the ones that build those key capacities, like having a central repository for the threat indicators and malware and that type of thing. So my center looks at the threat intelligence piece. We have 3 main lines of business: building awareness, integrating analysis across the intelligence community, and identifying opportunities to really accomplish the greatest effects that we can possibly have against the threats that we face at a national level. And we primarily serve decision makers, to include the National Security Council and the White House.
Erin, let me stay with you for a moment. I was chief counsel of the House Intel Committee when the Intelligence Reform and Terrorist Prevention Act created ODNI. I was also chief of staff at CIA and chief of staff at DOD, so I've worked very closely with ODNI over the years. Can you be a little more specific in terms of what is the product that you guys put out? Is it finished analysis? Is it threat warning? Do you have liaisons at different op centers across the community? Give us a little picture of how you operationalize all this terrific work.
Sure. So we look at that from the perspective of the intelligence community. So we want to service the intelligence community as broadly as we can with a daily product. And that's sort of your daily newspaper. That's saying what has happened in the cyber threat world today. What does that look like, and what might be of interest if you're tracking these threats within the community? So we not only try to look at all the intelligence threat reporting that's coming out, but also add a little bit of context to it to keep anyone who might be looking at that information current in their understanding and awareness. And that's really building awareness. It's not your deep dive. It's not every level that you might want to know. It's really sort of that daily, how do I know what's happening today and how do I stay current within the intelligence community? Then we also have a few other products that we provide as well. One is an annual threat report that we provide, and we also provide several other products, mainly for decision makers, though. So again, our customer set's a little bit different, being the intelligence community.
And you, of course, ran U.S. CERT. Now you have the perspective of a major corporate player, a global company, American Express. How is your team arrayed against the threat, and generally speaking, what role does threat intel play?
Yes, so I spent 20 plus years in DC area. Recently moved to the desert in the summer, of course, because that's when you move to the desert, when I went to work with American Express. I've been at American Express for a little less than 3 years, and I run global cyber operations for American Express, which includes all of the incident response functions, the security operation functions, and I would say threat intelligence is that underpinning for all the things that we do in the Cyber Fusion Center. It can be a source of intelligence from which an incident response activity can begin. It can be a source for further decorating an ongoing case that maybe is an analyst is working based off of an alert. It can be a source in which we're sharing through we have a number of sector information sharing initiatives that we're engaged in, like FSI-SEC and others. Even U.S. government, UK government can be a place where we're sharing threat analysis that we've done and things that we've seen within our network. And so it's kind of that full circle, I would say, associated with how we look at threat intelligence. It's leveraged by our lines of business. We work really closely with the fraud departments associated with the threat intelligence team. We do a number of things with global security where we're engaging with law enforcement on ongoing cases associated with that. Our intelligence is used for prosecution. And so I would just say it's an underpinning associated with all of the different organizations within my group as well as lines of business across the enterprise.
Terrific. Q, let me ask you a question about New York City. You're obviously in a location where you have every federal law enforcement agency represented. You obviously have a state enterprise, and obviously you've got the municipal and city level, which is premier in the nation. But you also are sitting within a couple of hundred yards, a couple miles of almost every major company has a representation in New York City. So how do you leverage all of that? How do you bring all of that expertise in-house? What are the main sources that you rely upon day to day for your threat intel?
Yeah, great question. I think New York City Cyber Command is in a very unique and interesting position Whereas there's so many different verticals within New York City. You have your financial, your energy sector, your water utilities, et cetera. So not only do we have to think about threats in one vertical, we have to think about them across the spectrum. So from an intelligence perspective, not only are we disseminators of finished intelligence to our agencies and entities, but we're also recipients of finished intelligence, and that's by way of our intelligence partners. So when with regards to sources, obviously they span from our federal partners, our private sector partners, but then also kind of churning through a lot of our own cases and developing our own individual intelligence. So there's a lot of information that we can gather from what we're seeing. And being that New York City has 8.5 million residents, and as I mentioned earlier, over 100 different agencies, we have a huge data set. So within that data set, there's a lot of intelligence to be gathered. So we use that as a really huge source, and we also add that, as Ann mentioned, that additional context to that data set to really build out that intelligence. So what we're able to offer to the different agencies and entities within the city is the lens from a systemic view. So, are we seeing something outside of the city from our intelligence partners, and also have we seen things hit the city in different agencies or across different verticals? So we're able to collect a lot of intelligence, but also add our own spin on it to be able to give our city agencies a leg up on the risk.
Chuck, you work with an organization, the Department of State, that's obviously in almost every country that the United States has diplomatic relations with, and in some countries, multiple locations. So you have a lot of tentacles around the world. Would you say your station, your posts, your embassies, your consulates are a major source of the information that you gather? And what are some of the other major sources? How do you leverage those sources, and how do you leverage them not just to respond, but to respond faster each time?
Yeah, so certainly I think one of the things that's been most effective for us over time is analyzing the activity we see targeting us and sort of making sense of that, building trends. And that allows us to better understand what may come next. Using threat intelligence, we're able to gather that sort of deep knowledge of the actors who are targeting us and what their intentions are and the way that they generally operate. And so that comes from, the threat intelligence feeds that we have through, a variety of private sector sources, and through the intelligence community, and from what we see on our network. And then that helps us to better understand and anticipate what's coming next, which certainly speeds up our response time.
And Ann, if I can ask you, again, when it comes to missions like Hunt or leveraging things like malicious TTPs or malware repositories, how does Amex or a company like Amex utilize those capabilities?
So we have a great AV product, our next-gen AV product that we leverage for a lot of what I would consider to be commodity. It's a massive database of malware samples that we leverage through those tools. And so that's a kind of, I would say, steady state for just tapping down the noise, taking care of activity. I think from the Hunt function, what we're really trying to do there is leverage certain TTPs associated with the threat actors that we know are targeting us. As a financial institution, our number one threat actors are going to be financially motivated, a shocker, I'm sure. And so we know the TTP is associated with the top 5 actors, and those are what the Hunt teams are tracking down. And it's not just looking for that activity associated with that, but anomalous activity, because we have great sensors across our network, from the endpoints to the boundaries, digital footprint, we're pulling in data externally. And so what hunters are really trying to do is look for that anomalous activity, look beyond the capabilities that we have deployed through things like next-gen AV and EDR capabilities, and look for, legitimate processes that might be doing something that's, odd or unusual. And so we really try to focus that next kind of level of activity associated with things that don't look normal, kind of the sniff test. One of the things our hunters do as well is they'll ask themselves the question is, how can I use this for a malicious purpose? And then they'll kind of follow that whole thread of creating a hunt associated with that. And then the goal is to take that hunt and then create content from that we can then put back into our sensors and our capabilities. So it kind of comes back full circle. And a lot of the hunt activity is started by things that come from the threat intelligence side of the house as well, things that are trending in the environment. I know a lot of people have heard about RDP activity lately. So there's a lot of hunting that's going on within our network associated with that, and other alerts that we're putting in our systems to tap down what we see in real-world events.
And Erin, there are certain things that the U.S. intelligence community is undoubtedly best in the world at, and yet we know that the intelligence community does always have a challenge on its hands when it comes to working with the private sector, because although a lot of the threat intel out there may be in the hands of the private sector, there are legal authorities, there are bureaucratic issues, and then there's just the commercial realities that in some respects, some companies don't necessarily want to cooperate with intelligence agencies, no matter what country they're in. Some obviously do, but some are more hesitant. How do you manage that whole array of challenges in liaising between the IC and the private sector with respect to gathering threat intel?
So I can answer that from several perspectives, I think. I've been an FBI agent for over 22 years, and in the FBI, we certainly have significant outreach. In fact, that outreach is so important that we actually have a division in cyber division, and that's called Mission Critical Engagement. And it's named that specifically so that we can emphasize the importance of that private-public partnership. DHS also has an extensive outreach program as well. And so in CTIC, from the CTIC perspective, looking at that, we can leverage the relationships that the other agencies and entities have initially. And then if there is a particular stakeholder that we need to engage with, we have expanded some of our mission to include some of that engagement. It's usually through the recommendation of one of the federal partners that say, there is a private sector partner that's really important here, and they should be at the table, and we want them here. Because our mission is not to interfere with the relationships that are built across the country with those who are dispersed across the country for that purpose of engagement, but our role is to really be collaborative across and to bring in the best of those who are in the best position to provide information so that we can get a cohesive threat picture across the community, or even more broadly, when I say community, it could be intelligence community, but also the greater federal cyber community, and then also the greater community at large, because we recognize that there are partners, global partners, that play a significant role in cybersecurity.
And let me ask you an unfair question, since you spend so much time as a Fed, but how would you grade the information you as a private sector entity get from the U.S. government, and also how would you grade the quality of information that you get from commercial players, not just CrowdStrike, but others that are offering that service, that product, and how do you integrate it? I mean, what's the mechanism at a global company like American Express for integrating all of that?
Yeah, because it can become a lot of noise. I think that's one of the things that happens with information sharing initiatives is that if you don't have a good way to curate that data, it just becomes a lot of noise. I think for small and medium-sized businesses, they're the ones that really struggle with cyber threat intelligence sharing because they don't have a good way to consume that. The way we consume it is through a threat intelligence platform, and so we are able to consume, we get about 50 to 100,000 indicators a day, and we can dedupe those, we can do normalization, and then we can deploy those indicators as appropriate to our infrastructure, because a lot of those indicators don't have anything to do with our equities, but our tip helps us understand that. We get indicators from FSISAC, US CERT, NCSC, the government's component associated with, it's very similar to NCIC, and we get a number of threat indicators from great vendors, as well as just OSINT, and so altogether there's a lot of duplication, as you can imagine. And so the last thing we want to do is have our threat intelligence information sharing initiative become more noise for our analysts to deal with. And so having that tip really helps us with that. Kind of getting back to your question, which I tried to sidestep a bit with the U.S. government, I think having been on the government side for 20 plus years and being on the private sector side now, specifically financial institution and working through the sector information sharing initiatives we have there, I would say a lot of things I see as far as the data we get from the government, it's the quality of the data is amazing. I think it's the timeliness. I think this is not a new thing for all of us to hear. Because the equities process that has to happen across a number of players in cybersecurity and the U.S. government, it delays the ability for the U.S. government to share quicker. It delays the ability for them to share even as timely as maybe the NCSC does in the UK, because they have consolidated cyber operations for that organization within GCHQ. And so from that perspective, I would say having 3 different, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the bubble chart in cyber, 3 different organizations, DoD, Homeland, and FBI, and then within that, 16 other organizations, and then you get into the intelligence community associated with equities, it just really delays the ability to share in a timely manner. The quality of data is is, amazingly flat on. It helps with financial institutions, but the timeliness is still something I see U.S. government struggling to do. And I stated this in testimony I did for the House Homeland Security Committee as well. So nothing new there. Where I do see a lot of improvement, and one of the organizations we've engaged in is the CISP program at DHS.
Which program is that?
The CISP program at DHS, and it is a bidirectional information sharing initiative. And I think, from my perspective, having been on both sides of that, I think that that's a really valuable forum in that it's analyst-to-analyst exchange. It's operators sharing things that they've done. We're actually doing a talk at the next quarterly meeting on what we're doing around this project we call Watchdog, which is getting ahead of researchers in the community that are looking for equities associated with data leakage. And so it's a great community to share those kinds of like-minded things. And I think there's a lot of benefit to that. And I would encourage U.S. government to continue with bidirectional information sharing, because it's not valuable if it's just one direction as well. It can lose its validity in my environment.
Let me ask a question to each of the panelists. Jump in if you want to add to this. Speed. What is the importance of speed to your organization's decision makers? Is it the most important thing? Is it increasing in importance? And what are some of the tricks of the trade, best practices, tools that you leverage to make sure that you're compressing that response speed whenever you face a challenge?
I can at least talk to some of that for sure. So one of the key things that happened is when Sony Pictures was attacked, there was a real demand for information at all kinds of levels across the community. Everybody wanted to know, what is this? What's behind it? What's happening? Is this something that we can expect to spread? Why is it happening? Why is it so intense? What's going on? What do we need to do about it? How bad is it? All these questions. And in the heat of the moment of an attack, it's very hard for decision makers in federal government or in any other key position to put their finger right on a particular pinpoint and say, this person can answer it for me. And in the government, there are many, many, many different people that they need to reach out to try to get that answer. And it's also happening in real time. So different agencies are responding, different agencies are doing different things, and the answers can be very complicated and hard to sort out and can be very confusing because you don't necessarily know what's happening on the ground, and different agencies are looking at it from a different perspective, so they can answer the very same question very differently in ways that make sense to the agency, but can be very challenging for a decision maker to figure out what's happening. That's one of the very reasons CTIC was established. So you contrast that with something like WannaCry. WannaCry happened after CTIC was established. So the value that we added there was timely intelligence about what was happening. We were available to convene the community and get relevant stakeholders together and get some of those answers so that when we answered for the community, it was with one voice. And we were able to say, this is what's happening, this is how it's happening, this is what we know right now, this is who is doing what across the intelligence community. And then that let decision makers say, okay, I know what it is, I know what I need to worry about or not worry about. Now I can ask different questions, more intelligent questions about, okay, where are additional resources needed? Do we need to deploy additional teams? How do I deploy? What's the best way to do this? And what is needed from our government or from any other partner. So CTIC was able to provide that. Another example is when we talk about speed and we talk about the speed and agility, when we talk about securing our elections, that's a huge challenge because we are decentralized by our very nature. And everything regarding elections was really about making sure that people could exercise their right to vote. So it's all about enabling. And enabling at the most local point where you could possibly be so that all Americans can vote and exercise their rights in the process. So given the decentralized nature of that process, when we recognized that there was a threat against our elections, whether it was from the standpoint of influence or any other cyber threat that we were concerned about, we had to get information out very, very quickly in ways that we had never had to disperse that information before or disseminate that information before. So we're taking national security information and working through that process that you talk about as quickly as possible to get it all the way out to the local level so that we could make sure our election process was secure. And to do that, we leveraged every capability we had across government. We leveraged DHS and their information systems that they have in place. and we leveraged their connectivity with fusion centers. We leveraged the FBI and their presence across the globe, and we leverage everything available to us. But we were able to do that much more quickly because we had a single point like CTIC to organize ourselves in a particular way to leverage everybody's capabilities very quickly and get the intelligence out for a quick response.
So,
Q.
sure. So speed is very important for us. And I think I can break it down in a few different ways. One, for New York City, we basically identified every different type of threat that could affect us, to our knowledge, and every different type of incident that we could come across. So with that, we then were able to curate these playbooks based on every different incident type and automate almost every one of them. So yes, we have our 24/7 Security Operations Center that's eyes on glass, but we also have these prevent, hunt, and detect playbooks that go out every single day, several times a day, based on different types of threats. So that also helps us with the speed of detection. So basically, we're automating a lot of the hunting activities within the environment, and that's throughout the city based on our visibility. Additionally, I think Dimitri mentioned this earlier, we take into account every point in the attack life cycle. So, anything from recon to exfiltration. And we use the MITRE ATT&CK framework internally. So one, we use that framework to, do controls testing, but then when we're looking at how efficient we've been in the monitoring, detection, and response capabilities of the environment, we see how fast did we detect something, how fast did we respond, how fast did we actually escalate it to the incident response team, how fast did we communicate to the stakeholder, so we look at every different metric and we see how we can optimize that for the next time. And then additionally, from an intelligence product perspective, we look at different threats or vulnerabilities within the environment with the unique eye to have this systemic overall view, and we issue these reports in a very timely fashion to be able to equip our executives to make fast, efficient, and knowledgeable choices within the environment.
Great. Ann?
I was just going to add, instant response is really a race between the adversary and the defender. And so one of the things I think doesn't get a lot of attention when you talk about speed is really being able to prepare and practice. And so one of the things we do a lot, and I think it was mentioned by Rob Joyce, is just the importance of exercises. That really helps your team become much more agile and much more effective in their response when you're actually practicing those playbooks. What we do is prepare for a really bad day. We have live range exercises, as well as mini drills, as well as tabletop exercises, and it's done from the incident response team, junior analysts. It's a great way to train, and it's also for benchmarking, and we do it from the incident response team all the way to the board. And I think having those regular occurrences of exercises, preparing and for those bad days, really does help for the response time associated with BAU or business as usual, and brings that speed time up for a response, because you find things every time you do an exercise that you think you make those assumptions that you've made. That's where your exercise comes in handy to help you make sure you're not making assumptions, that this is really the process that's in place.
Great. We have about 5 minutes left. If there are any audience questions, I'm happy to call on you. There's a warning. We'll come to you in a moment. Let me ask also the panelists. It's very tactical. I mean, you're in a tactical day-to-day fight. How do you kind of move from a tactical intelligence challenge to a strategic focus? What is the medium and long range challenges to the health and well-being of your entire enterprise? Chuck?
So I think understanding your adversaries and what their interests are, what they're interested in targeting in your organization, and what their capabilities to do that are, and how they're advancing through time is super useful from that perspective, because as you're implementing new IT systems and you're trying to implement, for instance, mobile capabilities and Wi-Fi and all these things we're trying to put in place, understanding the way your adversaries are targeting those things lets you make those strong strategic decisions in advance as you're putting that stuff in place, so that you're better positioned to protect the organization at the outset. I think the important thing is putting in place a good, strong defense and detection capabilities, so that you're prepared for these things as they come up, as opposed to simply trying to decrease response time once you're compromised.
I think, Erin, I know you wanted to jump in on this topic as well, the strategic focus.
Yeah, thank you. So if you look at the National Cyber Strategy, you look at several pillars there. We're all about protecting the American people, promoting American prosperity, preserving peace through strength, and promoting American influence, which is really about getting a coalition of like-minded individuals to keep the internet safe for everyone, for all use. So everything we do is aligned with those pillars, and we're trying to get to the best position that we can possibly get to at a strategic level so that the internet can be a better place and a safer place for the American people and our interests. So to do that, we look at the tactical information and intelligence that we have. We say, what can we learn from this? What can we learn from the tactics of the various nation-state actors that are coming at us? What do their activities tell us? What can we learn? Not just from the cyber perspective, but much more holistically, and that's an advantage that we have because we can tap into some of the greatest intelligence that there is on some of these nation-state actors and some of the motivations that they have when they're looking to attack us and cause us harm. So we'll take, for example, Iran. We know that they use cyber attacks in response to U.S. policy and policy decision-making. We've seen that. We've looked at that. That's a tactical level intelligence. We say, well, how can we use that to a strategic advantage? So a lot of the conversations that happen in the intelligence community and throughout the federal community are about getting the goals that we want to achieve against those 4 pillars. And a lot of those calculations that go into these whole of government efforts include what you see in the public sometimes, but then also what you don't see. So there's public and non-public responses. So some of that would include things like our attribution, or we'll have indictments. But the indictments in and of themselves are not the ultimate goal because we know that holding an individual accountable is not necessarily the end goal, especially if they're not likely to come out of Iran. But what does that tell us? That says the United States is not going to stand for certain violations of law. And we are going to hold individuals and countries accountable when they violate our laws and hurt our people and our way of life, things that we seek to protect. We also, in part of that planning, it wasn't just about the indictment. There was a ton of planning that happened for months leading up to that indictment. What else happened? Sanctions happened. There's a lot of conversation about which sanctions, how, which were going to be the most effective. How do we look at this problem set? How do we focus it on the activity that we're trying to stop? Because we know that anything we do against nation-state actors, we're unlikely to put them out of business, right? We're not going to stop China's cyber program. We're not going to stop Russia's cyber program or Iran's cyber program. But how do we get them to stop DDoS attacking our financial institutions so that our financial freedom is restored and confidence is restored? So the way that we look at that is to say, okay, maybe sanctions would be important here, or maybe certain designations are important. And so we go through all the list of things that we have available to us, but also partnerships. We have global partnerships. Our global partners are affected by this activity as well. So building coalitions around the world and saying, you know what, UK, can you stand with us? Is this something, because you've been affected too. The UK also came out with public statements against certain activity along with us. All of that was timed and synchronized in ways that we wanted to be the most effective we could possibly be. So that's how, just one illustration of taking that tactical level intelligence and trying to have a greater strategic impact.
I'm getting an encrypted message saying we are out of time, unfortunately, but this panel is amazing. They'll be here a little bit. You can say hello to Ann, Erin, Quiessence, Chuck. Thank you guys very much for being here. Give them a round of applause.
Thank you.